surprised the world this March with an incredible announcement. It had helped to negotiate peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran. These are two countries in West Asia, the so-called Middle East, that did not even have formal diplomatic relations for 7 years. They were basically at war with each other, and the United States had been pressuring Saudi Arabia to join it in its so-called maximum pressure campaign against Iran, which really amounts to a kind of hybrid war or unconventional war against Iran. Now, Saudi Arabia and Iran have signed peace talks, and China is talking about further helping to integrate Asia and especially working toward increasing their economic ties. And today I'm going to talk about how this can be a geopolitical game changer. And not only in terms of helping to bring peace to West Asia, the so-called Middle East, which is a region that has suffered from constant US wars and destabilization and intervention, but even more significantly, in my view, is what this means for oil and specifically the petrodollar. Since the 1970s, the vast majority of oil in the global market has been sold in US dollars. And this has been one of the ways in which the US has been able to maintain the hegemony of the US dollar after removing its links to gold in 1971 with the Richard Nixon shock. And the way that the US pressured Saudi Arabia to sell oil around the world in dollars was a way that the US could maintain economic hegemony. But now we've seen that China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia are all countries that have talked about selling oil in other currencies, not only the Chinese currency, the renminbi, but other currencies as a way of challenging the hegemony of the US dollar and US economic imperialism. Now, in addition to the massive economic repercussions of this deal, we can also see that this is part of the global drive toward multipolarity. And of course, China is one of the founding members of the BRICS system, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And both Iran and Saudi Arabia have formally applied to join the BRICS bloc. That means that now that Iran and Saudi Arabia have formal diplomatic relations, I don't expect them to be friends with each other, but as long as they're not at war with each other, this means that they can be integrated into the BRICS. The BRICS bloc can be expanded. Iran has already become a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. This includes China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Central Asian states. It represents more than 40% of the global population and more than 1/3 of the world's GDP. And in addition to Iran joining, Saudi Arabia is an official dialogue partner of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and has expressed interest in joining as well. So what this all shows is that China is helping to facilitate unity all across Asia. This has sometimes been referred to as Eurasian integration because Russia's involved, but as we see with the proxy war in Ukraine, Russia has been basically kicked out of Europe. So I think it's a much more accurate way of describing it as Asian integration. And we see that China is at the heart of this, encouraging this so that there can be stability all across Asia. So economic
1998 and in 2001. The talks between Tehran and Riyadh occurred in Beijing this week, and the deal was inked during a ceremony Friday. China's most senior foreign policy official, Wang Yi, celebrated this as a victory. This is a victory for the dialogue, a victory for peace, and is a major positive news for the world, which is currently so turbulent and restive, and it sends a clear signal.
We need to go to war now.
Yeah, you better go. Tehran and Riyadh cut ties in 2016 after Saudi Arabia carried out an execution of a prominent Shia cleric. This resulted in protesters storming the Saudi embassy in Iran, provoking the end of its ties between the two nations. Tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia have been inflamed by other conflicts in the Middle East. In Syria and Iraq, Saudi Arabia backed the extremist forces, meaning ISIS and al-Nusra. That's what they mean. Saudi Arabia backed ISIS and al-Nusra in Syria. And Iran backed Syria. In Yemen, Riyadh has fought a war against the Houthis for nearly a decade.
Wait, so Iran backed Iraq and Syria. Why are they saying it's city-wide?
Wait a minute. Iran, in Syria and in Iraq, Saudi Arabia backed extremist forces. Okay. Saudi Arabia claims the Houthis are a proxy force of Iran. However, Riyadh and its supporters in Washington have failed to present credible evidence that Tehran provides any significant support to the Houthis in Yemen.
Oh my God.
So then this just talks about when they almost came close to having a peace deal. And then that General Soleimani arrived in Baghdad airport January 3rd, 2020, with a diplomatic message for Saudi Arabia when he was killed by American drone strike ordered by President Donald Trump.
That's why he
at the behest of Israel.
They wanted to kill him forever.
Because he was going to make peace.
Oh my God.
That's
what a coincidence.
That's exactly what they would do to Zelensky if he made peace. They would kill him.
Wow. The world is our Fred Hampton.
That's right. So that's why Trump did that. Trita Parsi, executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, said the deal was good news. This agreement is good news for the Middle East, since Saudi-Iranian tensions have been a driver of instability in the region.
Wait, are you sure they just couldn't find Soleimani the whole time?
Yeah. So some people disagree, of course, but this is a great thing, and it's bad for America because China's got a lot more influence now in the Middle East because of this. Recall how the United States assassinated Soleimani while he was on his way to peace talks with Saudi Arabia. With Netanyahu and Pompeo as the main lobbyists for that lethal strike, Israel seems to have just lost its main coalition partner in the regional war it planned against Iran. So Israel loses another partner in war, and the Saudi-Iran peace brokered by China today may very well be the cornerstone for Petrojuan. That's it. That's instead of a petrodollar, we have a petrojuan, meaning that they're going to start selling oil in Chinese currency, which is bad for the United States economy because that will damage the petrodollar. And I don't want to explain what that is again, but the petrodollar is what Saudi Arabia does for us, and it props up our dollar, which is why every country in the world uses the United States dollar as their reserve currency, and they use it to trade with each other. It's because of the petrodollar. It's going away because now they're going to start selling oil in Chinese currency, which they've never done before.
Well, how could that harm us? Free market competition.
Yeah. And then it's also paving the way for this BRICS, which is this new, another economic power center away from the United States. It's got Russia in it. It's got Brazil in it. It's got, I think, India. Is Venezuela in it? Anyway, so this is and they got 3 oil producers. It's got Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. How hard will it be to create a new currency that's backed by oil and gas? Not hard. Endless possibilities in a multiple. So everything they said Trump was supposed to do, they're doing. He's saber rattling with nuclear powers, they're talking about putting troops in Mexico, invading our neighbors. They're alienating the rest of the world against us, so they now form economic power centers against us. They said Trump was going to do this. Biden and his oligarchy is doing this. You are witnessing a historic moment. China brokering the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran is both the icing and the cherry on top. They did more than decades of the U.S. bringing peace to the region and have cemented themselves as true mediators on the world stage. It's a huge win. And here's one more. This is fresh out of the oven. Xi Jinping plans to speak with Volodymyr Zelensky for the first time since the start of the Ukraine war, likely after he visits Moscow next week to meet with Vladimir Putin, according to... So China's going to be the peacemaker now in the world, and the United States is the world's terrorist, because we are. We're the country most other countries fear the most is the United States, and by a long shot. So, again, there you go. Your country's being run by psychopathic murderers for money. And they don't care if they break other countries, and they certainly don't care if they break our country or wreck our petrodollar. That's what they're doing. Anything you want to add to this, Kurt?
I mean, I hope they look out for all the banks when this happens.
Me too. All right. Keep voting.
Haven't we been saying on this channel show after show that that the U.S. is so absorbed, the Biden White House is so absorbed in Ukraine that they are losing the geopolitical diplomatic war everywhere else. And I think that this is proof to that. This is huge proof to
It's
that.
absolutely.
Yeah, I have to ask you. China is the new global leader.
Yes,
I mean,
it
is
is.
that is that a correct statement to make? They are the new global leader. All countries now are going to be looking towards China, perhaps maybe even Israel. Dare I say? Perhaps maybe even Israel may be saying, Netanyahu may be saying, things are changing in the world, and maybe we need to rethink our position here as well. And the China-Russia alliance, this is proof that it is changing the game in the Middle East. I mean, they may have unlocked a way forward for some sort of peaceful coexistence in the region. Case in point being Yemen.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and then you have to ask the question, what does this mean for the petrodollar, BRICS, the SCO, all these things? I mean, I just want to say that the Biden White House is, you can't say sleeping. You would probably say they're sleeping, but they're not. They're completely obsessed and absorbed with
Yes.
Ukraine. And they're the ones that are always talking about hybrid wars. We're going to do hybrid wars in Georgia and in Moldova. Meanwhile, we have the deal of the decade brokered by
Yes.
China.
Absolutely, you're completely right, and absolutely, I mean, there's, you're totally right in what you said. Now, for decades, especially in the Middle East, when it came to mediation, the United States was the only game in town. I mean, you have to go all the way back to 1965, when there was a conference in Tashkent, when the Soviets brokered a truce between India and Pakistan during one of the various Indo-Pakistani wars. And that was only a temporary thing, by the way. It didn't really hold. Whereas this looks like this is much more solid and much more real. The Russians, of course, also came to kind of agreement with Turkey and Iran, the Astana process, to settle the situation in Syria. But these Russian brokered deals, I mean, they're not epochal like what we've just seen China achieve between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I mean, no way. So this is, as you absolutely rightly say, it is China becoming a world leader, a global leader. It is, if you like, the moment when China seized the initiative and established itself as, the successor, if you like, the definitive successor of the United States. This deal, perhaps, more than anything else we've been talking about, is the moment when you could say the unipolar moment has really ended, and the American period of global dominance and hegemony has really ended, and the era of China has begun.
It also demolishes the decades and decades of U.S. sanctions on Iran. It demolishes all of that. Well-timed, very
Yes.
well-timed by China to coincide with Xi Jinping
Yeah.
in his third term. I mean, the Biden White House, the State Department of the Biden White House has shown how incompetent they
Yes.
really are. I mean,
Yes.
this is complete incompetence. What are they going to do to try and spoil this?
Well, good question. I mean, the only thing they can do, because, I mean, they've been throwing everything they have at Iran over the last decades, and it's never worked. By the way, before I continue with that, can I just make a point that this, of course, also vindicates the Raisi, Khamenei faction within the Iranian elite. I mean, there was always that battle between so-called liberals and so-called conservatives the Conservatives won the elections last year, with Raisi becoming president, and they pursued a much more hardline policy towards the US. They showed less interest in working with the US, but they have pulled off, with Chinese help, what, liberal governments in Iran, so-called liberal governments in Iran, never managed. They've pulled off this deal with Saudi Arabia, and they've consolidated Iran's position in its neighborhood as a major political player. So I think we have to now accept this fact that this government in Iran is here to stay, not just, the Islamic Republic, but this particular faction within the Islamic Republic. After a win like this, I have to say it looks unchallengeable on its own ground. So I think that's the first point to say. But you're absolutely right. The Biden administration, they've been out of the picture. They've been uninterested in what's going on. All those decades of US foreign policy engagement in the Middle East, going all the way back to the 50s, and it's all gone up in smoke. I mean, an entire region is now breaking away from the United States. And it's all happened whilst the angry old man in the White House and the people around him are fixated on Ukraine.